What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper video. Today we're going to continue our Phyrexia All Will Be One Pauper set review with the last of the cards for this set. We're going to take a look at the colorless cards. But before we jump right in, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button below on the video just to help out the channel and make sure we keep growing so we can keep giving you this awesome Pauper content. We are going to jump right into a quick rules recap to go over all the new rules and token types in the Phyrexia set, and then we will dive into the colorless cards. Let's get to it. First off, we have oil counters. Oil counters are a new type of counter that will be placed on permanents and tracked. Think of it like charge counters or energy, similar to those type of effects. These creatures and or machines or artifacts mostly are going to have abilities that require you to spend oil counters to activate. Next up, we have a returning mechanic, Proliferate. For those of you who don't know how this works, I'll give you the exact text, but it is a keyword. It's an action that states choose any number of permanents and or players that have a counter, then give one additional counter of each kind that permanent or player already has. So for each permanent or player you choose, they get an extra counter of every counter they have. You don't get to pick a specific kind of counter to proliferate. Say that this player has a poison and an experience counter, right? Poison is good for you, experience is good for them. If you want to proliferate them, you have to give them both. So keep that in mind. It's a small interaction, but it might be useful to know about. Next up, we have Corrupted. Corrupted is a new keyword that is going to alter cards based on the amount of poison a player has. Corrupted triggers if a player has 3 or more poison counters, specifically an opponent. So you will see spells that have additional effects or better effects if your opponent has 3 or more poison counters. Speaking of poison counters, what are poison counters? Poison counters are a tracked counter on players that are given through Infect, Toxic, some other effects on cards that will just straight up give poison counters. But if a player ever has 10 or more poison counters, they lose the game. Think of this like an emblem. You just track them outside of life totals, and if they ever have 10, they lose. Speaking of ways to give people poison counters, Toxic. Toxic is a new keyword that is replacing Infect from older Phyrexian type sets. Toxic is a static number of poison counters this creature grants during combat. So a Toxic 2 creature, regardless of its power in combat, will deal its regular damage. In addition, it will also grant 2 poison counters. This effect does stack. So if you have a Toxic 2 creature and you give it Toxic 1, it will give 3 poison counters if it hits a player. Keep in mind, this effect does not use the stack. It resolves with damage, similar to Lifelink. It is not a triggered ability. How is this different from Poisonous? If you're familiar with that keyword, I mean, the long and short of it is it's not. Yes, technically, poison was a triggered ability, so it resolved after damage, but there's not a whole lot of gameplay scenarios in which you're going to need to know that difference. But otherwise, it is the new way to give players poison counters. And lastly, we have a new rebel ability called For Mirrodin. For Mirrodin is a keyword found on some equipment in the set that creates a 2/2 red rebel creature token when the equipment enters the battlefield and then attaches the equipment to it. So think of this like the new Living Weapon. Living Weapon was an older version of a Phyrexian ability on equipment that made a 0/0 germ token and attached the equipment as it entered play. This is a 2/2 body at standard. So it is more expensive. You'll see a lot of the equipment in this set cost more mana than you would otherwise think they should, but they do come with a 2/2 creature automatically wearing it, so that is something to keep in mind. All right, there's one last new thing to talk about, which is a new token type called a Phyrexian Might. These are 1/1 artifact creature tokens that have Toxic 1 and cannot block. Lots of cards are creating these. Sometimes they create it on ETB, sometimes they create it on death. But remember, these cards have toxic, so they're going to deal combat damage and poison counters, and they can't block. So that's a really important thing to be aware of in this limited. That wraps up all the rules, guys. Let's go ahead and jump right into the color reviews. All right, welcome back, guys. Let's jump into these colorless cards. As usual, joining me is Josh, aka Mayo, on the internet. What's up, man? You ready to finish up the set here? Take a look at what we've got left, and then do a little talking about what we think are the best cards.
Oh yeah, I am so ready, especially because these next couple of cards are bombs.
That was a bad joke, but they are bombs. In fact, they are skull bombs, which is the series of cards to follow up the traditional spell bombs. We had an original Mirrodin set of spell bombs, and then we had a Scars of Mirrodin set of spell bombs. Now we have a Phyrexia set of skull bombs, which are their versions. So, kicking us off is going to be the white spell bomb. It's Basilica Skullbomb. And it's a 1-mana artifact that has 1 colorless, sacrifice it and draw a card, or 2 and a white, so 3 total. Sacrifice it, target creature you control gets +2/+2, gains flying until end of turn, draw a card, but you can only activate it as a sorcery. I'm pretty sure that's a theme through all of the bombs, but we'll double check as we go through. Unfortunately for me, I think I'm largely a pass on this entire series. But what do you think about this one, the white one?
This one, I am. I'm not really happy about any of these spell bombs. I mean, they have the pay 1 sacrifice draw card, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, I look at these largely in comparison to the original spell bombs, original Aether spell bomb, Pyrite spell bomb, that kind of stuff. As opposed to like the Scars of Mirrodin spell bombs, like Nihil spell bomb, which had kind of a different mechanic.
Yes,
they were incredible, but they weren't built. They weren't built quite the same way as the original spell bombs. And these, this new iteration, these skull bombs are much closer to the original spell bombs in my opinion. So, I kind of evaluate them on that plane. And unfortunately, Pauper Constructed has just moved far past this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see very few artifacts that sacrifice to card replace. And the ones that are played are hyper efficient, and these just don't have that kind of efficiency and or value generation built in. Things like Nihil Spellbomb are played because it's a free activation with an optional card draw. Things like Chromatic Star is essentially a free activation that also doubles as mana fixing but draws a card. And then you get things like Implement of Combustion and Kuldotha Red, that have utility built in and also draw a card because you're getting value off of that ping. So it's definitely the spell bombs and the pseudo spell bombs in like Star and the implements and those kind of things. They're very, very popular. I mean, we have had lots of variations on this kind of cycle, but unfortunately, 1 mana to just draw a card is not good enough anymore, and 3 mana would probably have been playable, at least in some iterations of this type of pump my creature and then draw a card effect, but this activate only as a sorcery. I mean, we've harped on these two kind of design limitations several times, right? Activate only as a sorcery and activate only once a turn are like actual death sentences to whatever they're printed on. So
yes.
it's really hard to get past that for me. I think the whole series unfortunately suffers from that limitation, and really, really big whiff for me on this one, unfortunately.
Yeah, so when I mentioned the 1 colorless sack to draw a card, that was the best part about these. And you're right, there's so many cards that have gotten past that limitation. And like there's pay a colorless, sack it, do something else, and draw a card, which all of these are just missing the something else.
Yeah.
And then if you get into the, again, activate as a sorcery ability, or abilities that they have, they all say draw a card, which is nice. It's a combination, or at least I want to say a nice combination of the old spell bombs and the scars spell bombs
Mhm.
in the way that you do the thing and then you can also draw a card.
Mhm.
But all of these spell bombs, when you pay the 3, the 2 colorless and the one of the color,
Mhm.
all of those target one thing, and draw a card is in the same text line. It's in the same ability. It's if you are able to remove the target, which all of these are actually fairly easy to remove. They all say target creature, except for the red one has artifact or creature.
Mhm.
So if you just remove the target, then you just never draw a card off of this. You paid 4 mana to actually do nothing, and that's my problem with these.
Yeah, it's very kind of reminiscent of the old what was it, like the cryptic command gambit, where
Yeah.
the draw a card was always like the riskiest mode to select unless you were tapping all creatures, because it was non-targeted, so if they whiff the original target, the second part doesn't resolve. But yeah, it's yeah, I have several issues with this. I think they could have designed them in a way that combined the two spell bombs, or even reversed maybe the original spell bomb. So instead of I believe it was colored mana to activate its original ability and then colorless mana to draw a card. Maybe it was the other way around. It's been a while since I've looked at them, but I think they could have
Mhm.
probably done like a front loaded version, or maybe a reversed version, so that the original was colored mana to activate and then colorless to draw a card. Maybe this should have been colorless to draw a card and then colored mana to activate the optional ability when it goes to the graveyard. Similar to how like the Scars of Mirrodin spell bombs function, but you use the colored mana up front and then the colored mana or the colorless mana to draw the card after the fact. Um, Maybe something along those lines, just to stay within the same kind of confines, but allow you to meaningfully do both instead of this weird sorcery speed middle ground. Not a fan.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's not like I don't have a problem with the costs on some of these, except maybe the green one could probably be 2 mana, but they all seem to be fine costs. I mean, except Basilica Spellbomb again, probably 2 mana.
I just
Um,
can't imagine why something that pumps a creature needs to be activate only as a sorcery. This seems distinctly like what you want
mhm.
to do to protect your creature, but you can't, and that's a huge downside. But anyway,
Yeah.
let's take a look at the blue one. Let's see maybe if there are some better ones. The next one up is Surgical Skullbomb, which is the blue Skullbomb. Same thing. They're all going to cost 1. They all have an activated ability of 1 sacrifice to draw a card. It's going to be the 3 mana abilities that differ. So on this one, it is the blue one. So it's 2 and a blue. Sacrifice it, return target creature to its owner's hand, then draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. Um, so again, I really wish that this was 2 mana and instant speed activatable. I think that that's going to be a theme for me across the board. 3 mana is like okay, but not at sorcery speed, right? I would pay 3 mana for this at instant speed, although I would rather it be 2 mana and instant speed, and then at least it might be playable. As it stands, these cards are largely bulk.
That's fair. Yeah, and this is the one quote unquote removal spell bomb
Yeah.
of this cycle.
Yeah, which is such a shame. Like things like Pyrite Spellbomb are like to this day still in contention and playable. Implement of Destruction is a good card. Nihil Spellbomb is hugely played. So
Yeah.
to have us like at least one of each, like Aether Spellbomb even makes some appearances here and there. So um to have an entire cycle of these like Mirrodin Phyrexia bombs and not have a single one that's even remotely playable is such a shame for me. Um, but do you have any notes specifically on the blue one aside it's
No,
bad?
not specifically on the blue one. I mean, I suppose this one you have the least chance of being blown out because you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
targeting their creature.
Sure.
So you're probably going to draw your card the most with this one, but
All
it's
right.
largely a pass.
Well, next up is Dross Skullbomb, which is the black one of the cycle. Still has 1 mana to cast, still 1 mana to sacrifice to draw a card, but this one has a 3 mana, 2 and a black. Sacrifice it, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. Is there any reason this needed to be anything other than like an unearth. Like, why is this a raised dead over something like an unearth? Especially with this, like, that would have made the sorcery speed restriction make sense. And it still could have costed 2, which is more than unearth. Yeah, there's no reason to pay 3 mana for a sorcery speed raised dead that says draw a card on it. I mean, we have cards like Grim Recovery and Reaping the Graves. Like, why? Why is this card so bad? Like, this is probably the worst one of the cycle for me.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't really ever want to be activating this. I don't think it's the worst one of the cycle. Rather, I don't want to be playing this in a deck if I can help it.
Mm.
Um, it's the I want to say it's the second worst of the cycle, and we're getting to the worst one for me.
Okay, well, that's the red one, I gather. So the red one, same thing, 1 to cast, 1 to sacrifice and draw a card. But this has a 2 mana activated ability. For 1 in a red, sacrifice it, put 2 oil counters on target creature or artifact you control, draw a card. Yeah, you're right, this is the worst one. Not only is this
I'm
confined
glad
to, like...
we have an accordance here.
Yeah, not only is this, like, just scarily narrow and probably relegated to like only limited playability. It's only limited playable in this limited. Like, it's not even like applicable for other sets or like in future or past synergies. Like, literal nothing. This is bad.
Right? Yeah. There's no special words on it. You saw the spellbomb, the white one gave flying. You know, it
Yeah.
references something that's going to be useful in the future.
Why
This is
could
literally
this
just
not have
oil
been
counters.
like +2/+0 in haste or like a reckless charge type effect? Or I mean, if they really wanted to stay away from like the pyrite spellbomb, they could have gone like a falter effect, or deal 1 to...
Panic spellbomb is already a falter.
Oh, then it probably could have been like a smash dust, like a 1 damage to all creatures without flying.
Oh yeah,
Something like that would
there's
have been fine.
they have the design space
Yeah,
left to still do good things with the cards. They just
chose not to.
Yep.
All right, and then rounding out this cycle is Myr Skullbomb, which is the green one of the set. Still 1 to cast, still 1 to sacrifice it and draw a card. Back to 3 mana for the activated ability. 2 and a green says target creature you control gets +3/+3 trample and draw a card. Again, activate only as a sorcery. Man, this card might have been halfway playable without that last sentence. 3/3 and trample's a lot. Obviously, I agree. I would have liked this to be like a giant growth, maybe, and if they wanted to keep the trample, then maybe 2 mana would have been fine. But I mean, we have giant growth, 1 green instant +3/+3. Why is this sorcery speed for 3 mana with another mana investment prior to this? I just don't see why these cards are nerfed so hard. This feels like they went out of their way to make them bad.
It really does, huh?
It really does.
For a set that's really supposed to make these Phyrexians seem like a real threat and like they're gearing up for something big, there's really not a whole lot that I'm impressed with.
That was my point in, I think it was the red one, when I went on my whole like tangent about how it genuinely seems like the Praetors and the Phyrexian forces have gotten weaker since we saw them last. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but man, they do not feel as powerful or as fearsome as they once did. And yeah, the Skullbomb series here, this cycle is definitely speaking to that. But
Right?
we can move
Reinforcing
on
that.
to greener pastures here. We have some other colorless cards to check out. So let's check out the next one, which is Dune Mover. It's a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Golem for 2 mana, 2 colorless. It has Toxic 1, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land, shuffle it, and put that card on top. This was so close to good.
Well, the thing is, we saw something similar to this just without toxic from Strixhaven
Mhm.
in a power down set, right? So
Mhm.
that kind of leads me to believe this is also another power down set.
It certainly
Um,
could be. At least on the common level, it certainly feels that way. Like
mhm,
some of the mythics seem very, very good, but um
mhm.
as far as the common power level, it definitely feels like probably the last two sets. Dominaria United had some bangers, um
Hmm.
but like Brothers War and this distinctly feel very weak.
Yeah.
Um I'm sad though. This card was so close. If instead of on top of the library, this said put into play, like if this was just a
Into
colorless
play?
rampant growth,
Absolutely not.
if this was a colorless rampant growth on a 2/1 with Toxic 1, it would be insane. And if this was a Pilgrim's Eye where it put it in your hand, it'd still be
Yeah.
pretty good. But
Yeah.
on top, man, that is just awful.
Yeah. I don't like the idea of putting it on top.
Me neither.
That's the same reason the other one isn't played, is because it's a 2 mana, 2 something. I think it's a 2/2.
Mm-hmm.
And it just has the search for basic. If it was, now I understand this is probably really good, but it's kind of pushing what's acceptable in Pauper. If it said any land, put it on top of your
Ooh,
library. I think the
yeah.
on top is,
Okay. More
you know,
acceptable.
yeah. But I am not going to ever be excited about paying 2 mana
No, you're absolutely right.
for a 2/1 and then guaranteeing a basic card draw or
Yeah.
basic
I mean,
land
what
draw.
would you say if I told you you could have an understated 2-drop that also whiffed your top deck on turn 3?
Oh boy, howdy.
Yeah, it is. That's what this card says, and man, it's not gonna be good. But it was so close to good. This
Mhm.
says into play, it's insane. This says in your hand, it's very playable, or at least marginally playable. And unfortunately, it says the top of your library, and it's absolute trash. Which is sad because Phyrexian Golem and like having a real Phyrexian artifact creature, this is like as true to Phyrexians taking over Mirrodin as it could have gotten. Like a true artifact Phyrexian Golem is like as close to Mirrodin being truly like conquered by Phyrexia as it could have been, and this is a really bad representation of that.
Yeah, it's uh, as much as I want to say about this guy.
All
I
right.
feel like we can stop beating him. He's already dead, you know.
Well, let's see what the next one is then. Myr Custodian or Myr Custodian. It is a 2/3 artifact creature Myr for 3, and it says when it enters the battlefield, scry 2, then each opponent may scry 1.
Hmm. I like this guy.
I think
Um,
this guy's probably fine, but I just don't understand why he needed to let your opponent scry 1.
hmm, I think he has to because he's colorless.
He's a 3 mana 2/3. We have cards
Yeah.
like Filigree Familiar that gain you life and outright draw you cards for this mana cost, and Scry 2 is too good?
I I suppose because it's just an enters trigger, you could probably do the draw, but it'd have to be draw one, and then your opponent gets to scry something.
No, just
And I don't
Scry
think there's
2 and nix the opponent part. Like, I'd be perfectly fine with this being a 2/3 artifact creature for 3 that just say ETB Scry 2. It doesn't need to draw a card. But comparatively, we have other colorless 3-drops that have like substantially more text than this, and it doesn't give your opponent marginal upside. I just don't understand
yeah.
why this has to have like a downfall. They were like, Scry 2 is too
Well,
good.
yeah.
Like,
There's other cards that have similar downfalls, and I mean it's like each player draws a card
mm-hmm.
at 3 mana at colorless.
Yeah.
I think they just want to maintain that artifacts that don't have a color don't really have that identity, but it's as a design space, that's almost how they've been approaching white card draw for the longest
It
time.
is, yes. But
So
also, Filigree Familiar
yeah,
just absolutely shatters that power level that
mhm,
they're trying to
absolutely.
maintain here. So
Yeah.
obviously, this is a power down set. That's to be expected, right? They're not really going to be pushing the boundaries. But this feels like deterministically bad. They were just like, here, have a colorless scry 2 on a mirror that'll help you, smooth out your deck. Also that's way too powerful, so your opponent gets one too. What? Not sure why this had to have a downfall on it. It seemed perfectly. It still wasn't going to get played. If you completely omit that each opponent may scry 1, if you take the downside off the entirety of this card, it still isn't good enough. So I don't see a world in which this needed to be toned down at all, is the point.
Fair. Yeah, this card is never played. Like even with just Scry 2 when it enters.
But I will say the flavor text for this card gives me hope because I like my little Myr boys, and I was really excited to see Urtet on Josh Lee Kwai's Command Zone game that just dropped today. He was piloting Urtet Myr Tribal, which is really cool. I love Myr, and I love the Myr tribe, and I'm so happy they have a legendary. But it's interesting to me that he has a quote in the flavor text of this, because I've always kind of imagined Myr as like these silent observer pit droid style things that just kind of like, they observe silently, they do their work, and then they leave. And then this one, or at least Urtet, distinctly has like a voice and intelligence and is speaking if he's quoted. So it's just really interesting for me. It's just really interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Never thought I'd see a Myr legendary, and I never thought I'd see a speaking Myr.
If you look at it, there's really no mouth on these things, isn't there?
Nope.
So yeah.
No, I always peg these as kind of like, sentient pit droids, and they just observe. And I mean, that was always kind of the motif that they were given in original Mirrodin.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you had Myr Enforcer who like gets in there, but the rest of the Myr, all kind of tapped for mana, and they all just like, had their own little biome, but they always were kind of set up to be these like silent observers and watchers of their areas. And I guess now we know who they're like reporting that information back to. But anyway, cool Myr. This is a pass for me. I mean, like I said, even without the downside, this card is not good enough to be played. So unfortunate, but I don't think I don't think this card has much of a future outside the bulk bin.
Well, yeah, the problem is he just doesn't tap for mana.
Yeah, that's a problem too. I mean, there's lots of problems, but that's one of them.
No, I mean as a Myr, you've like those the ones that have been played have tapped for mana, except for Battle Sphere.
That's true.
And
Enforcer.
Yeah.
But those both have 4 power, so we could probably make some correlations to that. Anyway, next up, Myr Kinsmith. It's a 3/1 artifact creature Myr for 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Myr card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. At common. So this is tribal support for Myr at common, which is kind of cool, but man, 3/1 for 4 is like a lot. Is there any reason this couldn't be like a Wirewood Herald? So it was just like a 1/1 for 2 that ETBs and gets a thing?
Well, the Heralds put them on top deck.
Sure, I'd be okay with that too.
Yeah. Usually, well, the elf one costs 3, doesn't it? Elvish Harbinger.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts it on top. All the Harbingers from Eventide put it on top. So I figured you can just...
Herald puts it in your hand, I thought. Wirewood Herald, specifically.
Oh yeah, just straight in your hand. Yeah. For 2 mana, put it in your hand. That is... just better.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no idea why this couldn't have been a Myr Herald, right? 1/1 for 2 colorless, search for a Myr, put it in your hand. That would have been even playable, right? But as it's 4 mana for a 3/1 on a fringe tribe in a in a format that doesn't have a ton of Myr to support, I mean, it's basically just getting Enforcer, right? So yeah, not sure why this had to be as toned down as it is, but
could have been like a bear for 2 mana. Or a bear for 3 mana and put it in your hand.
Sure.
Bear for 2, put it on top. Like
Bear for
there's
2, put it on
no
top. 1/1 for
yeah,
2, put it in your hand. Bear
there's
bear
no
for 3, put it
reason
in your hand. Yeah, there's a
that I
lot of
can
ways to
see.
balance this.
Yeah. But the thing is with the other tribes, there's creatures that have enter the battlefield effects.
Mhm.
Uh you want to take a guess at what Myr don't have?
Well, I mean, they have one. It's just not in
Mhm.
Pauper.
Yeah, they do, and it's just one.
Yeah.
It's not I don't know, I don't see why they couldn't push the tutor um effect because of that reason.
Exactly. I mean, like, really, what are you searching for? This doesn't seem like it would be like some gangbusters, backbreaking tutor effect. It's not even like a well supported tribe. So I feel like they were due for a little bit of love. And getting a legendary and commander viability for the tribe is fine. But yeah, I really would have liked to see this search for another Myr card. Because, like, what's the best thing you're getting? Another one of them? We have Squadron Hawk. Like, that card is
Yeah.
so much better than this card is. So I don't know why it had to be like, undertuned like this. But in either case, really cool card. I like the design space. I just wish it was a little bit, better.
Yeah, better is probably the word I would choose.
Mm.
Like normally, there's like different things people could do with the cards, but like this is like all of these cards seem lacking
Yes,
recently, at
definitely.
least in the colorless set.
In an
Colorless.
artifact set, especially, like,
Hmm.
feels well. I mean, technically, it's not an artifact set. Brothers War was an artifact set. This is just a set that takes place on an artifact-heavy plane. Uh,
Hmm.
But all right, and then the last of the true artifacts we have is Phyrexian Atlas, which is a 3 mana artifact. It's a rock, so it taps to produce 1 mana of any color. And when it becomes tapped, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters loses 1 life. So it has a corrupted. This is like an anti-pristine talisman,
Hmm. And
but
I
it taps
like.
for any color.
Um, what are your thoughts on Phyrexian Atlas?
Um, I want to like it. I think that corrupted is not good enough, and loses 1 life is not like an impactful enough ability to play this over something like Network Terminal for me. I think the majority of the time I'm going to be playing that instead. If I need a 3 mana rock, that's kind of what I'm looking at. And then we just got Energy Refractor, so you have another way to kind of make colored mana from colorless mana. It's not a ramp source, it's a filter source, but if you really need ramp source, your network terminal and being able to loot cards is probably much better than pinging your opponent for 1. Um, Especially with a maximum of once a turn. Kind of this same problem I had with what was it, like the scrap wheel scamp, or what, the oil counter pinger,
Yeah. Oil
right?
pinger.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the ceiling of 1 damage a turn with a floor of 0 damage a turn is like really bad. And this has the same problem for me. Um, I think we have a better version of this card already in Network Terminal, and I'm not sure that this is strong enough to displace it. I really like this art. This art is sweet. Uh, I like the card effect. It's probably pretty good in limited, but I don't see this being strong enough to make the cut in Pauper.
Yeah, I like it. Like I said, corrupted is easy enough to get to. And then that could be like it could just be Phyrexian Atlas control, but it would really need to be super controlling in order to stop some of the combo decks and the aggro decks. So, I mean, you're looking at uh, blue for combo decks, and you're looking at, I'm guessing, red, um, maybe black even for some stronger board wipes. And
So I don't know if you saw it, but Snapbolt just posted a new League video. He kind of returned to the Pauper scene because he was excited about All Will Be One. He posted just recently this afternoon a black-blue creatureless infect control, and even that wasn't playing this.
wow,
So Yeah,
So, well, he said it was infect control, not corrupted.
yeah, they're killing with
Mm,
poison counters, right?
yeah.
But it is a creatureless black blue control deck that is using poison counters, and even that couldn't find room for this.
Well, that makes sense in the way, like, if you're actually trying to kill them with the poison counters.
Of course, but what I'm
It's,
saying is that
mhm,
if that deck is
yeah.
possible,
Hmm.
what control deck wants to play this and try to ping them out instead? Like if the style of control is so supported that you can play hard dedicated creatureless blue black control and just win through poison counters, then why would you want to play a
Why would you
control
use
deck that
damage?
doesn't win through
Hmm.
poison counters? You know what I mean? Like, why would you then try to make a similar control deck that needs poison counters but doesn't use them to win?
I see what you mean. That doesn't make me any less excited for this. It just makes it like a tier 4.5 card, you know?
I think this card's going to look absolutely incredible in foil, and I might pick some up just to have them because this card looks sweet. I love the art style. I love the color against the black and gray. It's very much my style. It reminds me kind of the design of my tattoo, where it's like the black and gray, very muted colors with these bright, vibrant color pop highlights in like the suns and the little rainbow that's working through with the Atlas. And yeah, I really love how this card looks, and I wish that it was better. I would have liked to see this be something closer to like 3 mana tap make one of any color, or even like 3 mana tap pay 2 life make one of any color, like Phyrexian mana, kind of like the corrupted Myr, I think is what it's called, the one that taps for any color but pays 2 life. Um, and then have this be like a 5, maybe even a 6 mana activated ability that says target player gets a poison counter, or target each opponent gets a poison counter. I would have liked
Okay.
to see this be like, Contagion Clasp, but for poison, so that it would need to be like
Specifically
inhibitively
poison
costed.
counter.
It
Hmm.
would need to be inhibitively costed for sure, right? It'd need to cost a lot, more than 4, somewhere in the 5 to 7 range probably. Um, and it would be like marginally untenable, but it would be exciting enough that I would be trying to build stuff with it. And instead, we have this, and I'm not even looking for what to put this in because I just don't think it's strong enough.
Fair. I it I wa- I really want to though. Like this seems like a deck building challenge, doesn't it?
Sort of. Again, I'm of the mind where I'm just
Mhm.
drawing the comparisons to what we already have, and I can't find a whole lot of reasons to run this over network terminal, because I think that in a control deck,
Mhm.
card selection is going to be more important than pinging, when most of the time, once you stabilize, you're either going to have an infinite loop that wins, or you're just going to stabilize the board and then like beat them in with a haymaker like a Dinrovahor or a bunch of Muldrifters or something. So I have a tough time believing that the ping is going to be worth jumping through the hoops to get corrupted set up in a control deck, and then subsequently not use corrupted to kill them, right? Like when instead, if you're already trying to set up corrupted, you could just start proliferating, and every proliferation is 2 activations of this, and you know seems a lot more in line with what you're already trying to do. So this is one of
Yeah.
those cards that seems like it just doesn't have a home for me, because it's trying to do a couple different things, but it doesn't do any one thing well enough that it like deserves a spot, you know?
Yeah. I see what you mean, and I
It's so pretty though. This card looks so good.
don't just want it to work, you know.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, that was the last of the artifacts that we had to look through.
Yep. And then we have the 5 land series. So I'm going to run through these pretty quick and then we can evaluate them together. So the first one is the Fair Basilica. It is Elish Norn's Palace. It is a land sphere. All 5 of them are spheres. It's a new land type introduced in Phyrexia All Be One. All of them enter the battlefield tapped. They all tap for a color of mana associated with their praetor, And then they all have 2 mana and tap, 1 colorless and 1 of their color, sacrifice and draw a card. So for we have the Fair Basilica is white, we have the Surgical Bay in blue, we have the Dross Pits in black, we have the Autonomous Furnace in red, and we have the Hunter's Maze in green. So, what are your thoughts on this cycle here? What are you thinking?
I originally liked them because of the reduced cost to sacrifice them and draw a card. But then we had a little bit of a conversation beforehand, and I don't really know what I would play these over.
Yeah.
Because I'm not playing them over a basic. Like 1 or 2 basics in a deck. I'm not playing them over a land that fixes mana. Definitely not playing them over the ones that cost 4 and tap sack to draw a card.
No, because those color fix you.
Exactly.
You
So
mean
I don't.
the campus, not the campuses,
Not the campuses,
the
tramways and
destinations,
stuff. Yeah,
the Capenna destinations.
exactly. And I'm not
Mhm.
playing these over the Skylands. I'm not like I don't
Yeah.
know what I would want to play these over.
So a lot of people are comparing these to the cycle lands, in that they are all single color land sources, and they both turn into cards when you want them to turn into cards. A lot of people are saying that these are much better than the cycle lands, and that they are going to like immediately replace all of the cycle lands that exist in Pauper. Now, besides the fact that not many decks are running cycle lands, Old School Burn, before it was called Author Red, ran a couple of Forgotten Caves. Mono Black Control can run a couple of the Baron Moors. But not much else runs cycle lands to begin with, so I don't think they have a huge like need or huge niche to kind of make room for themselves in already.
Mm-hmm.
But then on top of that, when you really start to look at the granulars, and this is kind of my problem with them, is that the cycle lands are a tapped land when you need a land, and a card as soon as you need a card. Right? And these are a tap land when you need a land, but they're a card the turn after you need a card. So I evaluate these in a couple different ways, right? My usual evaluation process is to look at the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and then what I anticipate to be the most common scenario. And then I kind of rate each of those situations out of 10, and then I take an average, and that's kind of my rating of the card overall. In this case, the best case scenario for these cards is obviously, you drop them on turn 1 with no 1-drop, and then just they're a basic of their color for the rest of the game, and then when you run out of gas, you pay very little mana, 2 mana, you tap it and you draw a card. I mean, that's like akin to Horizons, right? Those are great. And then the worst case scenario, though, is where this card really falls down, where if you're in top deck mode and you top deck this card, it is not a card that you can cycle or draw with right away. It enters tapped, and then it needs to tap for the activated ability, and that's a huge downside to me. Because in comparison, the cycle lands have the same constraint when you play them early, right? They're still a tap land, but when you need them to be a card, although you can't use them as both, right? You have to pick a land, right? It's either a card or it is a land. But when you're on top deck mode, in the absolute worst scenario, when you draw those lands, they are a card immediately. And that is a very big boon for the cycle lands, in my opinion. Now, I will happily be wrong here if that's not correct. If the majority of the time these just end up better because they can be both, and that versatility has value, I'm okay with that. But at first glance and upon kind of more critical evaluation, I don't think these are as good as the cycle lands. I think that with correct decision making and most often correct play, the cycle lands are going to afford you more opportunities than these. And for those reasons, I like the cycle lands more. I don't think I'll be playing these instead of them. Now, that being said, if in some crazy world there is a really dedicated monocolor deck that has room for 8 tap lands, I will absolutely run both sets, right? But if I have to pick between the two, I'm still playing cycle lands. I think they're just more efficient overall, and I think most of the time, as long as you make correct decisions, the cycle lands are going to be better more often.
And we spoke a little bit about that as well, because like any deck that can really effectively run that many tap lands, I mean, you really have to have the conversation with yourself: is why are you not playing the Gates package? And so if you can come up with a good answer to that, and then by all means,
Yeah, no,
play these.
that's an
But
excellent point. I mean, if you're talking about running these in addition to the cycle lands, and you're in a one color package and you don't instead just run gates and support Basilisk Gate, because if you're in one color, right, and you can support 8 tap lands, Basilisk Gate comes into play untapped. You're in a single color, so the colorless mana source from the untapped Basilisk Gate isn't likely to hurt you a lot. And the tap lands can all produce your color of choice and make Basilisk Gate significantly stronger than the draw option of this card. Like, having a land that gives a creature +3 to 4 to 5 is significantly better than pay 2 mana, sacrifice a land, draw a card, on turn 10 of the game.
yes.
I'm kind of with you. I think that there's not a ton of compelling reasons for me to try playing these cards over the cycle lands. And if I ever find myself in a situation where I'm thinking about playing these in addition to the cycle lands, I should probably just look at running the Gates package in that deck and see if it would be better. Now, that being said, I had mentioned a creatureless control deck in black-blue, and perhaps there is an opportunity to run some number of these in that deck, strictly because the Gates package isn't necessary. You're not running any creatures. But yeah, man, I struggle to really commit to these and say that they're better than the cycle lands. I think I'd still prefer to play the cycle lands in those style of decks. So yeah, sadly, these are kind of a miss from me. I gotta say, people are gonna flame me for this. The comments are gonna absolutely implode, but these should have been artifact lands.
I would not have hated that. That would have given a reason to play them. It would have made them different.
Yeah, if these were artifact lands, they would be very good and excitingly playable. Decks would find ways to play this card, right?
And it would allow Pauper to actually finally have the hard discussion about banning the bridges.
Well, yeah, that's a separate problem, and I think that discussion's already started, which is great, but yeah, I would have really liked to see these be artifact lands, I'm not gonna lie. I think that it would have been a better card, and it would have given the opportunities for other decks to use them in ways that they can't use, say, the bridges. Yeah, I really would have liked to see these as artifact lands. That would have been the best case scenario, I think, for me. But that's enough about what we think. What do you guys think? Let us know down in the comments if you disagree with anything, if you're really hyped for any of these cards, if you would have liked these to be artifact lands. Go ahead and let us know below. As usual, guys, thank you so much for sticking around and making it through the video. If you've made it this far, make sure you drop a subscribe and hit that notification bell so you see the next videos when they post. The next video coming up is actually going to be the best of the best for Phyrexia All Is One, so we're going to give a small discussion on what we think the best cards for every color out of the set are, and give you kind of a sneak peek into the commons to look out for or order your foils of going into the new season of the constructed Pauper metagame with Phyrexia All Will Be One added to it come this Friday, I think is when it's legal. So excited about that. As usual, guys, goodbye forever. Unless I see you next time. Peace out.